Here's a fact for you. There is a direct ideological line between US settler colonialism and the Nazis. The USA, post-independence, was the world's first state explicitly founded on racial ideology, explicitly founded on the idea of like a superior white race that needed to keep its bloodline pure, and they needed to take land from and exclude other races. It was the first. The French didn't do that. The Spanish didn't do that. The Dutch didn't do that. The British didn't even do that. The Americans did it. Only after independence did they start doing it. And what I mean is not those places didn't do colonialism, didn't do settler colonialism as well, because they absolutely did. But it was in the independent USA that explicitly excluded Native Americans and even freed slaves from citizenship that, you know, had, even after some of them were allowed citizenship, and black people were, but not American Indians up until like 1924 or something. You know, there were still anti-miscegenation laws and stuff. So what happened is, and I'm going to make a longer video about this soon, one of the biggest reasons for the Declaration of Independence was that the British king had prohibited American settlers from manifesting their destiny further to the west because he didn't want to fund the defense of frontier settlers anymore. So one of the biggest reasons for the supposed freedom war from the British, you know, the oppressive British tyrants, was that the oppressive British tyrants didn't want them to steal any more Indian lands. From Jefferson to Jackson, and including presidents after them, we have this clear ideology of the idea that, like, white, specifically Anglo settlers, needed to head west and take land from Native Americans through whatever means necessary, whether they needed to be massacred, whether they needed to be deported, whether they needed to be killed more indirectly, like through destroying their food sources and their way of life, etc., to take the land from them. The US is an explicitly Nazi-like project from its very founding as an independent nation. It's significantly worse than most other colonial projects, and that's saying a lot. And it wasn't just against Native Americans too. It was also explicitly against imperialists, against other colonial powers and other states that had become independent from other colonial powers. Do you know how the US bought Louisiana? By threatening violence, forcing the French into the deal. Do you know how the US got Florida? Same thing. Like, there was a bunch of, and Oregon as well. It's by threatening the British with war if they didn't, like, hand it over, basically. And then there was the war with Mexico, where they took California, a bunch of other southern states as well, including Texas, though that was a bit more complicated, because basically they had always planned to take these places for themselves. So the US is explicitly just a massive imperialist project, and it was from the very beginning. It was an aggressive imperialist project, not just against native peoples, but even against other settler colonists, even against other colonial powers. You know, the reason why didn't the US end up doing a mass genocide like the Nazis did? Well, for one, they didn't quite have the means to, and they weren't quite yet at the point of having to eliminate the Indians. It was more like the Indians, you know, they're in our way and need to go. But I mean, if they were in your way and they didn't go, then that was taken as like free reign to kill them, their women and their children. That's the only difference, you know. And another reason why Manifest Destiny wasn't quite as violent as the Nazi expansion to the east is because a lot of native people happened to be killed by disease right around the time when the settlers were expanding. They would have tried to kill them in warfare if the disease hadn't done it. It's not like it just they happen to die and then they trotted along like, oh no, everyone here just happened to die from disease. You know, they wanted to expand anyway. It was just like a happy accident for the American settlers that it happened. Do you know who both the thought leaders and the implementers of German colonialism in Africa took as their reference? The US experience. They saw Africa as sort of like a Wild West. And by the way, the terms Wild West and Western are explicitly colonialist. That taken from the idea that, us superior Anglo-Saxon white people have to go west and take this territory from these wild savage Indians. That's what Western and Wild West means. The Nazis use the term Wild East, by the way, in the exact same way. So first, German like colonial leaders explicitly were inspired by Manifest Destiny. But Manifest Destiny, by the way, it's a term that was coined later to explain something that really originates with the Declaration of Independence. So if you're like, but Manifest Destiny came much later, it doesn't fucking matter. Jefferson, Jackson, basically every politician between those two, and for quite a few presidents after Jackson as well, believed in this. It's in the Declaration of Independence. It's right there. The complaint that King George was preventing the colonists from expanding into their rightful manifest destiny in Indian lands. Okay, so you get from that, and then you get like German colonialists who explicitly referenced, not Spanish colonialism, not French colonialism, not Dutch colonialism, explicitly the independent US, not even British colonialism, just the independent US state as their reference for what they needed to do. They needed to get more living space for Germans, and they described the indigenous people there as redskins, explicitly. Then this sort of idea was picked up on in the very early 1900s and the late 1890s, 1900s by German intellectuals who, in correspondence with American intellectuals and historians, got the idea from them of Lebensraum, which was a word coined in 1901. Basically, the idea that Germans had like this divine right to more living space in the East, and that the indigenous people, in Poland, basically all of Eastern Europe, needed to be either deported, eradicated, or enslaved so that Germans could get their rightful living space. Do you know where they got that? From Manifest Destiny, literally from Manifest Destiny. They constantly reference in these writings the US example and refer to Slavs as redskins. They talk about it in terms of, the US West is our East, stuff like that. And then Hitler read these works. He talked to the Lebensraum theorist, and that's where he got his idea. Himmler as well was also big on it. That's where they got their idea to colonize the East. In World War II, the reason that the Nazis invaded France and tried to invade the UK, they invaded France, they tried to invade the UK, they invaded Scandinavia, Holland, Belgium, etc. The reason they did that is because they believed that they needed to do so to prevent those countries from stopping their colonization of the East. It wasn't, ideally they wouldn't have liked to do it because they wanted to expand into the East to massacre all the people who live there, or enslave them or whatever, or deport them, and take the living space for themselves. So the Western Front was basically a means to an end for them. Nazi ideology was based on the concept of Lebensraum, which was based on the concept of Manifest Destiny. That's a fact. They took the US specifically as their guiding ideological example. Sure, there's slight differences, mostly because of practical concerns. I'm sure Hitler would have loved it if when they got to Poland, everyone there was just having to die from disease, or they somehow could have taken it without needing to kill the people there because they left after explicit threats of violence. And then there's a clear ideological chain leading to the Nazis, leading to Hitler, leading to Himmler, leading to World War II. I mean, it was the very idea of the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The idea behind that is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for white Anglo-Saxon farmers on Western land stolen from Native Americans. That was what that meant, explicitly. Jefferson, for example, was obsessed with the idea of the white yeoman, independent yeoman farmer who would be given an ample estate as a reward for him helping to colonize the frontier, and black slaves to help him work the land. That was what he was talking about. Basically, the founding idea of the USA is we want to steal, we want to conquer and either murder or get rid of these Indians somehow. You know, we don't want to mix with them at all. We want to live separately from them. They need to get out of here or they will be killed. White, pure white Anglo-Saxon individuals can take that land from them and use black slave labor to pursue liberty and happiness, but only for those white human farmers. I'm going to make a much more detailed video on this with lots of specific examples. Like the ideological chain is undeniable. Not just that, but the explicit similarities between Nazism and Jeffersonian sort of Jacksonian expansionism in the US is undeniable. Like if the US had the capacity to do what Germany did in Eastern Europe, they would have done it. And in a way, like Nazi racial ideology was taken directly from US state racial ideology. Well, yeah, they weren't exactly the same, but part of the reason for that is because the Nazis further developed what the American founding fathers had created. Like, generally when people talk about Nazism, it's the anti-Semitism part of it, which is obviously important, but Nazism was precipitated on practically primarily on the concept of Lebensraum. Like, it wasn't just, the conspiracy theories against Jews in Germany. It was that and the Eastern expansion for living space. And in the East, practically everyone there was considered to be less than human and only worthy of genocide. Aside from the German minorities there, of course. They were seen as being like in the way of German settler colonial expansion. That's another thing, is that the Nazis the Nazis heavily romanticized this idea of like the Aryan yeoman farmer who would settle on the frontier with a rifle and kill any of the subhumans who came to stop him. That is literally the exact same as the Jeffersonian ideal of the frontier white yeoman farmer. Eugenics is not important to this conversation because it literally didn't exist. It literally didn't exist when Manifest Destiny was created. Darwin came 60 years later. It's irrelevant. I mean, I'm not talking about like they both did forced sterilization. Many more countries did forced sterilization that also didn't have this sort of foundation. I'm not just taking random things and saying one side did this, the other side also did this, therefore they're all the same. I'm explicitly noting a specific ideological chain, where you can trace this chain from the US to the Nazis. I'm not just literally going like, the US did settler colonialism, the Nazis also did settler colonialism, therefore the US and the Nazis are the same. It's like, it's similar to going like, you have Marx, Lenin, Stalin, whatever, right? And then of course Gonzalo. Oh, and Mao, and then of course Gonzalo. It's like, if you were to list the three heads of Manifest Destiny, that'd be like Jefferson, Jackson, Hitler, basically. There's a very clear ideological chain between them. Jefferson, Jackson, Friedrich Ratzel, and Adolf Hitler, okay? That's the four heads, because Ratzel is the guy who coined the term Lebensraum and explicitly linked it with Manifest Destiny in the US. And he corresponded with tons of US historians who lauded what they did to the Redskins, as they called them. And he was like, man, these guys make this sound awesome. We should do that to the East. He also sort of integrated it with Darwin as well. The misappropriation of Darwin to justify eugenics. Ratzel had traveled to New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, Richmond, Charleston, New Orleans, and San Francisco. Wow. And then he came back to Germany and is like, man, we need to do what they did here. I'm going to make a longer video about this, but for now, we have this little stream clip. And then it's like, so, imagine that you had like a state like that explicitly founded on what is basically a more successful Nazism. And then like 200 years later, you're like, we won. Get over it. We won. Get over it. That's Vosh and all the other pro-settler colonial leftists who try to frame any sort of resistance to that as ethnic cleansing, because apparently colonists is an ethnicity now. I can tell you what Eastern Europe would be like if the Nazis won World War II. Like the USA, circa 1850. That's what it would have been like.